This is Things Police See, First-Hand Accounts, with your host, Steve Gould.
Hey guys, welcome to the podcast that interviews active and retired police officers about their most intense, bizarre, and sometimes humorous moments on the job. I am Steve Gould. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. This is episode number 78. It's gonna be a good one. Before I get to it, I want to do some shout outs here. I want to say thank you so much to Barry Shepard. He's the Chief Executive Officer of the American Police Hall of Fame and Museum located in Titusville, Florida. He reached out and he sent me these awesome challenge coins. If you watch the YouTube video, I'm holding them up right now, but these are the real deal. These are solid, they're thick, they're beautiful coins. So if you're in Florida, if you're planning a trip there, swing by the museum, check it out, support it. I wasn't even aware of it, and actually had a friend who went to Florida for a week. She was down there with her boyfriend, and she came back and brought me this patch from the Police Hall of Fame. And I was like, oh, where's that? And then I looked at the patch and I said, you know what? I think like a week ago, someone who works there reached out to me. So I went back in my messages, and sure enough, it was Barry Shepard, the executive officer of the Hall of Fame. And he sent me these coins, and now I have a patch, and she said it's incredible. It's really, really cool. So check that out, and also go to their website and support them that way, and go to Barry's website as well. And also the sponsor of the show, once again, is Burley Boards, owned by Dan Carlson. Dan is an amazing craftsman. He made this, which is incredible. It's a wood carving of the state of Massachusetts with a blue line through it. It's about 3 feet long, 2 feet tall. It's huge and awesome. I love it. I got to find a way to mount it. But thank you, Dan, for that. So go support him. I have him here at Burley_boards on Instagram. He just does beautiful work. He does everything. He does cutting boards, tables, countertops, custom wood burning, and he can make custom pieces. So go check him out and support him. He's a big fan of the show and law enforcement, and I thank him for that. So without further ado, one more housekeeping item I got to do. I forgot to do last time. I want to read up the sponsors of the show who month after month give throw some shekels my way to help support the show, which is amazing, because every month I see my PayPal says I paid for Adobe, paid for the website, paid for your podcast hosting, and I never have to pay for it. It just comes out of the rolling fund. I just leave it there and it gets paid for. So thank you to Jacob, Ruth, Amanda Powell, Carmen, Schumer, Rich Emery, William James Long, Samantha Harper, Gary Steiner. The great Gary Steiner will be returning, by the way. Richard Wilson, Scott O'Donnell, David Diaz, Timothy Wright. Thank you so much, everybody, for supporting the show. Just awesome. I'm so happy you're doing that. And even with the little break, I think only one person fell off, and you guys are still supporting me. So I appreciate that. And I'm going to do my best to keep these rolling. I got more scheduled. So more will be coming out, I promise you. And besides that, there's a back catalog of 70 plus hours of just incredible, crazy, insane stories from law enforcement people around the country, men and women around the world. Actually, there's some people from different countries. So thank you for that. Today's guest is really cool. It's because we've had a U.S. Marshal, we've had an FBI agent, but we've not had a DEA agent. And that's been requested a lot from me in the past. And my answer is always, well, I don't know any. So until one reaches out, I won't be able to get one of these guys on. So Stephen Morreale of the Cop Doc Podcast. Actually, we connected online and we spoke a month or two ago. And he's got his own podcast going. It's it kind of concentrates on police leadership and innovation. Super interesting podcast, especially if you're into law enforcement and knowing, just hearing how leaders in law enforcement from around the country and the world think, to me, is super interesting, especially now in these times where it's, I don't know if you want to be in that seat, but these guys and gals really lay it out, and just super interesting stuff. Also, the guy's got a resume like you wouldn't believe. So this is going to be one of those times where I'm just going to read it because I cannot commit this much to memory. So he is a professor and a doctor at Worcester State University currently. Dr. Morreale served in law enforcement for 34 years, having retired as Assistant Special Agent in charge of U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Office of Investigations Inspector General. Woo, that's a mouthful. Before that, 20 years he served with the Drug Enforcement Administration, serving as special agent, managing agent in enforcement groups, and as chief of the Asset Forfeiture and Financial Investigations section in New England. He served with the Dover, New Hampshire Police Department, which is super local and very cool for New England, and U.S. Army Military Police Corps as an MP and military police investigator in the U.S. and Europe during the Vietnam era. Holy cow, that's a lot. So my guess is this guy's gonna have some stories, so I can't wait to get him on. I got him on the other line. Let me seamlessly bring him in with my fancy video software. Steve, welcome to Things Police See. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks so much, Steve, to finally get together, and we were able to talk beforehand. And for your listeners too, it's interesting that those of us who take the time to do this as a hobby, certainly this is not our full-time job, but I appreciate the listeners, and you were helpful when I called and said, how the hell do you do this? And so I thank you, Steve.
Oh, that was my pleasure. And you probably felt it too a little bit when in the podcast police world, it's a niche. And when I started in 2018, there was very few, and I didn't really know anybody at all. So when you reached out, of course, right away, I saw the message and I, checked out your podcast, and it was clear that you were a pro. I was like, oh, this is a guy I definitely want to talk to. It was nice to fellowship in that way, to talk to somebody else who has the same things going on, kind of talk equipment, talk scheduling, talk, just law enforcement podcasting. So that was really valuable for me as well. So I thank you for that. I couldn't hear you for a second. You there?
No, I'm back here. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm back here.
All right. Excellent.
No.
I do very little editing, Steve, so don't worry about it.
It's good. I know, and I do too much editing. So, one of the things that I think is neat is that you moved back to New England, and that's pretty special. We're probably 40 minutes, 50 minutes apart right now, and the rain is killing us. But I really enjoy what you do and some of the stories that you tell, and you gave me some ideas about what you've asked, and certainly I've heard from other guests. But I think it opens the eyes to people who want to be police officers, are police officers, or are very curious about police officers. And for me, I think it's sometimes it's embarrassing to have somebody read what I've done. Look, my life since 17. Yeah, well, but my life since 17 has been public service, much like yourself, and so I started a long time ago, 18 or 19 years old, and I decided I was going to be an MP, and I wanted to serve. Came back, became a police officer in New Hampshire, and then New Hampshire, I continued my education, and I guess I didn't want to keep shaking doors at 3:00 in the morning. And so I sought out some other opportunities, and I ended up with DEA for all those years. No,
it's very cool. And that's a very common thing people wonder about for, climbing the ladders of law enforcement. And there's a lot of paths you can go on. And I've met young people that they have it in their mind right away. I'm going to get a local or state department, but I want to be in the DEA, or I want to be an FBI agent. Mind you, they don't even know what that entails or what the job is like, but they know it looks really cool, and that's what they want to do. So it's really neat to have a guest like you that's kind of worked these different areas, and it's cool too because our podcasts are I tell a lot of stories and have a lot of patrolmen on who are in the trenches, and then the contrasting guests that you have are guys that were in the trenches but now are leading, which I think is fascinating because that's a difficult spot because being chief or deputy chief or director or whatever else of an agency, it's really hard to get the guys to like you. It's really hard to be a good leader. And, the favorite thing, everybody's thing to do is when the chief is out of the room to be, oh, is this policy, or he wants us to do this. You know what I mean? So I really like the fact that you started out at a local department. What year was that in New Hampshire that you started?
Excuse me, you're going to date me. 79. 1979.
Year of my birth, Steve.
Well, I'm sorry about that. You've caught up. No, that part is crazy. And listen, it's interesting because I just had a guest on, and he is a DEA associate special agent in charge. And one of the things we were talking about was this attitude that so many federal agents seem to have, and that is that they look down on local police. And I said, and I feel that my formative years were with local policing. No question about it. And it made me a much better DEA agent. When I was a manager, it was the same thing. I saw some people. I'll tell you what happened. At one point in time, I was running the Lowell Task Force, and there was a little ante room where you would walk in, and I walked in at 8:30, 9 o'clock, and there's this police officer in uniform. He's waiting outside, and he said, hey, what's going on? Somebody told me to wait out here. And I said, how long have you been waiting? Now, I'm the boss.
Right.
And I said, no, you come in. And I got him coffee, sat him down, and then found out whoever he wanted to talk to. And in the next staff meeting, I said to my crew, listen, when somebody walks in with a badge, I don't care what that badge says, whether it's state, federal, local, they are guests. They're not going to wait in the ante room. We're not going to treat them like they're snitches. And if I find out anybody else does that, You're gone. You're launched. We respect each other for the badge because we have to work together.
Absolutely. Well, that's great to hear that. I know since I've been working the feds I've had contact with, and they're mostly like FBI, DEA, or postal inspectors, even very professional and very cool people. There was a thing back in the day where the first department I worked for, there was this kind of story that would go around about what happened with the U.S. Marshals, and they. The Boston office, they were supposed to foster a relationship with the community if they were going to go get a fugitive. Well, they didn't. They didn't. Yeah. I don't know if they half-assed tried. Chief wasn't in, whatever. They didn't tell anybody. Well, the story goes 2 patrolmen end up taking down these 2 U.S. Marshals at gunpoint. And they're screaming they're Marshals. And the cops are like, we don't care what you're telling us. You have beards. You're not in uniform, and you're throwing badges at us. And they had their guns out about to go. So the whole thing was terrible. But luckily, it ended fine, and there was no one was hurt. But I do know that managing agent or U.S. Marshal, what are they called? The U.S. Marshal of that area.
The chief marshal.
He was very, very apologetic and very cool with our chief, and he was like, I'm so sorry. This never should have happened. I don't know how it happened. I'm going to look into it. And just very gracious with, mending that relationship because, it scared the hell out of everybody, including the neighbors in the neighborhood who witnessed this thing happening. And, marshals and a lot of guys that do apprehensions, they don't look like police officers. they look like rough dudes, So that's interesting. So, Steve, can you take us in the Wayback Machine back to your early years in law enforcement? Now, it doesn't have to be as a police officer, but it'd be interesting if it was your first hot call that you went on as a young law enforcement officer, where you really got your blood going and had a little adrenaline dump.
Well, I thought about that, and when you go down when you go down memory lane, you wish that you had written a lot of the things that you had experienced, and so I took a few minutes to pause and take a look. I think what was strange, I don't know if it was a hot call as much as it was an unnerving call, and I happened to be an auxiliary police officer in Newton, Massachusetts, and we back in those days, police actually had station wagons.
Really?
That ended up also serving as an ambulance. And so you would have this very rudimentary, it was almost like a military cot or stretcher. And I remember, being the first on the scene of the call with a partner of mine. When we got to the car, somebody had hit they were both drunk. There were 2 men in it. And somebody had hit an extremely large rock or stone abutment, and both had been thrown out the window.
Oof. And
in those days, which we don't have now, thank goodness, there was no safety glass. So they went right through, and it virtually, one of them, their neck was almost severed. Wow. And the other one, the face was severed right here, and you could actually see the teeth through it. So here I am, 21 years on, not yet an EMT. I ultimately became an EMT. Maybe I was 20. But we're the ones that have to bring these guys in. And it was scary because the screaming and the yelling and the pain that these guys were in was just horrible. And the most that I could do is to take a towel, a clean towel, and put it, apply pressure and move on and tell the guy who was, I see the look in your face.
Wow.
Thank goodness for EMTs and paramedics now, because that would never happen. But in the early days, that did happen. And again, another one, I think the more difficult calls that I had been on were calls for accidents, serious accidents.
I agree. Yeah.
And, okay, so when you roll up on the kinds of calls that we all get, a suspicious person or a break-in that's happened or an alarm with somebody inside, a motion sensor, I'm okay with that. I have the gun, I have a flashlight, usually I have a partner. I'm okay with that. And I'm not going to announce myself. I'm going to hope to sneak up on somebody, but it's the first on the scene, the blood, the guts. And if I'm the first one, I can handle blood. If I'm the third one in, I might want to puke, if you know what I mean,
absolutely.
Right, Steve?
Absolutely.
So, to continue, one of the next ones, it was in the Army, and I was called. I was all alone, and I was called. It was in the day, and I was at Fort Devens, not too far down the road from here.
I just went there for firearms.
Firearms, yes. That's where we were, and so I rolled up on the accident, and what happened was there was a deuce and a half, which is 2.5 ton truck,
right,
and it had flipped over. And I couldn't see where the person was who was driving. And I had to, so if you can imagine, it's basically a dump truck. I had to climb in underneath, lift the gate underneath. And here was this soldier who was talking to me, but was in severe pain. And it's all dark. It's scary to be there.
Sure. But
you're the first responder. And what we learned later, I held his hand. I couldn't even get out of the truck to call because I was tending to him, and ultimately he died. What we found was, as it flipped, the truck had cut him in half.
Wow.
And so I was talking to him. If you can imagine, he's still speaking, but in tremendous pain in his last moments. And the best I could do is hold his hand. And those are heart-wrenching events.
Holy cow. Yeah, you're taking me back to some crashes I've been to, and man, those are traumatic, aren't they? Especially when you're kind of growing your calluses, as they say, like they're
yes.
Man, those crashes, and we actually have one like that. I didn't go to it, but same thing, guy was pinned, and they basically said when we pull the wreck apart, he's probably gonna die. He's not going to live. The pressure's keeping him alive, type of thing. And a cop that I know was there and held his hand, and oh my gosh, just hearing the story gives me trauma. I mean, my dad has stories. He was a cop for 32 years, and like you were saying, and I've said this before, back in the day, he's like, there was no seatbelts. The dashboards were metal, and the glass wasn't safety glass. He goes, we would go to a rollover, and 4 people would be dead. Yeah. I go to rollovers now. Everybody's out of the car and they're like, oh yeah, we saw a deer. And I'm like, is everybody okay? Oh yeah, we're fine. It's like, holy crap. I've been to one of the guys like, can I send my kid in to get my laptop? I'm like, take it easy, buddy. And it's good for young officers to hear that, because it could feel career ending if you see that kind of trauma and you're not ready for it. I know I'm friends with a fire captain who told me once, a great guy, he said he passed out while watching the video in EMT class, and he was going to quit. He told the instructor, like, clearly this isn't for me. Like I couldn't watch a video about, I forget what the video was on, but it was like horrific accidents and like compound fractures and whatever. And the instructor took him aside and was like, "Don't do that. Stay the course, stick with it." And the guy ended up being a captain and a fantastic in bad situations. I went to many a crash with him on the highway that were horrific, and the guy was dynamite. He was great. Yeah. But you might see something like that, and you might it's a real wake-up call from watching what cops do on TV to actually caring for somebody in that kind of situation, where it's just It's just it's crazy. I mean, did you, after these events as a young man being exposed to this stuff, how did you handle it? Did you go right to sleep that night? Did you stay up, or did you wake up the next morning?
Yeah, I thought you were going to ask, did I go to counseling? Because, I spent a lot of time talking about wellness on
I just figured they didn't have that back then.
But they didn't.
No.
They didn't. I mean, for the first time I was, so look, like anything else, if you're on an evening shift, or you've gone through some trauma, it takes a little while for you to go to sleep. You had to unwind. You know that you've experienced this yourself many, many times. But I, what I like to say is, and this is for young officers too, we put it in a box, but it leaks at the strangest times.
Good way to put it.
What'll happen is, and trust me, I thankfully, I've got a wife who listens, and otherwise I would need some pretty severe counseling myself. Sure. But I think you said it a moment ago, you do get calluses, and it doesn't mean you become callous, but you do get calluses, and it helps you deal with the next incident. And there's going to be the next incident. The things that I had written about. So I recalled another. Thank you for, again, causing me to go down memory lane. I remember in 1980, it was graduation night, and we were all alerted. I was on an overnight. We were all alerted to be careful. And for 3:00 in the morning, I get a call that there's an accident. Somebody's calling from outside. I show up. They're in an MG midget. That small car.
Tiny, yeah.
Top is down. Two people are in it. And they hit a tree that, Steve, it had to be 25 feet wide. It was an old oak tree. It was not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And when I got there, the first thing I did, my partner showed up, is I just held traction on one of the people and the other person on the other, because they were in very, very bad shape. And we called for the rescue truck. It was our rescue truck. Here's another reason police should not be involved. No offense, but should not be involved in ambulance work, because
the ABC of policing, right, Steve?
Oh, my
ambulance
God.
before cruiser.
Yes. And what happened was that we used to keep it in a barn, and it was supposed to have been charged. And when whoever went to pick it up, it couldn't get charged. Oh, they didn't have jumper cables. I mean, it just was a shit show. Yeah. And ultimately, fire shows up, and they're telling me they want to take them out and they want to do all of that stuff. And I said, they're done. They're done. And I actually got pissed off at the fire department, because here they are taking pulse. Buddy, I've been here for 10 minutes with these two. They're both expired. Yeah. Get me a sheet. We can't. So I had to sort of say, you can. You're not touching either of them. This is my scene. You understand. And I wasn't pissy I was never mad with the firefighters, but buddy, they're dead. Yeah. They're both dead. But the part of the story that was so difficult was these two were high on marijuana and had been drinking. So there was that potentiation effect, right? They were out of it. And my chief showed up at about 5:30 in the morning and said, Steve, you're coming with me. Where am I going? Said, we're going to make the notifications. Oh, I have to tell you. So I'm the uniform guy. My chief is in plain clothes. And the first door I knock on, it's 6:00 in the morning. And as the door opens, the woman who opens it was a young woman, actually, was the manager of the bank who I had just talked to the day before. It was her brother.
Man.
And so here I am having to say, your brother is now dead. It was just horrible. So there's just think about that. The trauma of being there and being with two dead young people. And the next thing, disrupting the family by having to tell them that their loved ones had died.
Oh, it's hard. That is something I don't think anybody ever thinks of getting into law enforcement, that you're going to do a death notification. I mean, it makes sense when someone tells you, but you don't ever think of that. And just like you said, I had one where a young woman died, and I went to the house, and her mom answered, and right behind her mom was a 4-year-old, rubbing their eyes. It was her kid. She was out partying with friends, and it just sitting with that woman for as long as she needed. And I did as police, you do a bunch of them, and it's crazy how everybody reacts different. Like some people, it doesn't hit them. this particular lady wanted to, I got to call work then, because I'm not going to be able to come in, am I? And initially, and then she sat down and was like, turned white, and was like, oh my gosh, my daughter's dead. Like that everybody handles that differently. And believe it or not, even, I would consider myself more of a modern trained police officer, not in police academy. Like there's no there's like, no, we didn't get any training for that. And thankfully for me, like you said, we never did them alone. We always had another supervisor or just another officer with us. But yeah, those are, like you said, the box leaks. And
if you don't mind me saying, your box just leaked a minute ago. When you were telling that story, it came out of you.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Because you're brought back to that moment where you have pushed it aside for so long, but all of a sudden, whatever causes you to recall it, you think, oh, I could see your reaction. It's visceral, no different than my own reaction to recalling these events.
Totally. Or you'll be driving and someone will say, you'll hear a last name on the radio or something, and you'll go, and you'll just start thinking about it, and you don't even remember driving for the last 10 minutes. You're just, because you're back at that thing. Yeah, that's man, that's crazy. These are some crazy stories. See, we're not even to the DEA.
That's coming afterwards. Well, but I'll tell you. So I have another one listed, and it's not about. Well, it is all about death. I was in Italy with the Army, and I was an investigator, and we got called out in the middle of the night, the MPs and the Italian Carabinieri, the Italian National Police, and we get a call at 3-4 o'clock in the morning, and right outside the gate there was a straightaway, and two cars, both, it was summer night, no seatbelts. Once again, this is probably 82 maybe. No seatbelts and no top, and two cars driving in the 70 mile an hour range in about a 30, and they hit head on. And when we got there, 6 people were dead, already dead.
Oh my
goodness. 3 Italians and 3 Americans.
They have a reputation for driving like crazy in Italy.
Oh, it is crazy. There's not a lot of rules over there. And so, again, it's the same situation, I guess, fast forward from my Dover days. No, I stand corrected. Army came before Dover. So as 3 o'clock comes to 4 and 5 and 6, and we're clearing up the scene, and it's a recovery effort. We can't save anybody.
Sure.
As daylight comes, someone points up and points into a tree, and there is a 7th victim that got ejected and was eviscerated in a tree.
Oh my goodness. Isn't it crazy how far bodies can travel?
Oh, well, go ahead, 75 miles an hour. And the reason I remember that is that we were opening up some old boxes. My wife's going through some things as we clean out. And there was a picture of me standing there at the scene with my radio. And it brought me back. So it's crazy. I guess what we're saying is that the title of your podcast is Things Police See. I've seen some pretty serious crap, as you have.
Isn't it a cruel trick how, someone might ask you about a meaningful moment with one of your kids that meant a lot to them 20 years ago, and you're like, don't really remember that. Oh, I'm glad it was a good memory for you. But standing in Italy at a horrific scene is like you were there yesterday. It's incredible. Steve, can you tell us about a strange or bizarre thing that you dealt with in law enforcement?
There's a couple of them. Again, one of the first things I thought of was there was a call for a bell ringer. This is silly. So we're in Dover, and Dover is a mill town, and Dover is on the Cocheco River. And so much like you would see in Lowell, or you would see in Waltham, or you would see in Lawrence along the Merrimack River, or Manchester, New Hampshire, same sort of thing. There were these big factories that were put up, and they're probably 6 or 7 stories high. Well, what happened was that in the evening, very late evening, 11 o'clock, somebody was complaining that someone was ringing the bell on the top of the Cocheco Mills. And so sure enough, we're hearing bang, 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 bang. It's like a church bell.
Shenanigans.
But it's at 11:30. Yeah, well, there was shenanigans for sure. So myself and my partner end up there, and we can't see them. We can hear them, but we have to get them. How the hell do we get up there? And so ultimately we find a ladder, and we climb up a ladder. And if you've ever seen, or your listeners would know that some of these tall buildings have ladders that are strapped to the side of the building, steel ladders.
Sure. And
so up I go. Now I'm going up without any fear or trepidation, even though I'm not looking forward to what happens. And as I get to the top, there is this metal attached ladder has a loop going on to the roof. But as I get to the top, I realize, oh shit, it's not attached. So now I'm starting to swing off of the building.
Oh, no.
I got to be 75 feet off the ground. I'm pissing my pants, I have to tell you. But I'm also worried about getting to the top, because once I get to the top, when I poke my head up, I can get punched in the face and get knocked off the building.
Yeah, absolutely.
So ultimately, I'm telling you, stop. I don't even know who I'm yelling at. So ultimately, I get up there, my partner gets up there, and now we're in a pickle. We've arrested the guy.
Oh.
But how are we going to get him off of the top?
Is that that's the only way up, obviously? There's no other.
How else? No, there's no. It was just crazy. So we call the fire department.
Yes.
And the fire department, thankfully, sends the ladder. But now, this guy's handcuffed. What am I going to have to do? Well, I guess I'm going to have to unhandcuff you, because you can't send him down the ladder with.
I hate unhandcuffing people. I hate it.
That's the thing. So that's what we did. And obviously, by the time, first of all, he was petrified of coming down that ladder. Right. Yeah. Because at the other end, he's going to get locked up again. He knows that. But he was just somebody who was just tuned up for the night and just having a shenanigans was a good word. And so that's one of them. But now if I can fast forward to a DEA day,
yeah.
I remember we were out on a raid. So that means you're up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and you're going to show up. We were in New Jersey. And my office was in Newark. So we're going to spread out all over New Jersey. We're going to arrest about 100 people. And I'm on a team. We go make our arrests. We bring them to court and that kind of stuff. And we go back to the office. It's probably 3 o'clock. And we're writing our reports. And in comes the case agent. His name was Milt. And Milt says, one of the guys that got away that we didn't find is at the Swan Motel right now. Let's go. So we all pile out and we're going to go arrest that one guy. Well, when we get there, he gets there first, and somebody sees him and it starts kind of evading him. In the meantime, we go to the back. And as we go to the back, we know that there's a particular room where there are drugs, supposed to be drugs, and the bad guy. And what we find there, Brian and I find, another agent, 2 people with a razor cutting the screen of that particular room where we think the bad guy was. So now we're in a pickle. I'll never forget this, and it was probably the stupidest thing we ever could have done. So we identify ourselves, we place them under arrest, but we still have to go and find the person, because this is not the person we're looking for. So Steve, as God is my witness, Brian says to me, give me your handcuffs. So I give Brian my handcuffs, and he's already handcuffed one guy on one arm. He handcuffs another guy on the other arm, and there is a telephone pole in the middle of the courtyard. And so what Brian does is he tells them to sit down, and we handcuff them around the telephone pole, and we leave them there. Right? We leave them there because we're still doing the search, but neither of us has handcuffs at this point. So as the story, I'm sorry, this is a longer story. As the story goes, the guy who's evading us goes into a room. And so we go to that room and we knock on the door. And as we knock on the door opens. And my partner, Brian, is the one who's in the lead for this. He used to have been a New Jersey cop, now a DEA agent. And this lady comes, I won't give the last name, but her name was Patricia, it turns out. And she's hiding. What Brian is seeing, you understand, because you stood at the door, and the door very often is only opened a little bit. So you have to be very careful, but you can only see a few things. So as you're looking in the door, Brian calls out gun, And then we'd break the door down. So what he could see that I couldn't see was that she was blocking, and behind somebody was hiding a gun, not using a gun, but hiding a gun.
Right.
And that's what happened. So we walk in and we charge in, actually, and we call in the cavalry. And what happened was this had nothing at all to do with the guy we were looking for. Right? We just stumbled upon something else. Nothing. We thought it did, but nothing at all to do. And what we had done, I'm ashamed to say, is we had walked in on a crack. It wasn't crack. It was a free base, right? They were free basing cocaine at the time, and it was a sex party. That's what it was. It was a sex party with 2 guns, 4 women, 3 guys, all coked up.
Yeah,
I think we arrested 7 people, but it had none, and we had to turn them over to the local police. Grabbed a couple of guns. In the meantime, the guy that Milt was falling asleep. He turned out to be an attorney who had sponsored this and had narcolepsy. So the guy is asleep as we're getting to arrest him. He's asleep, and of course, my guys are like kicking the bottom of his foot. Wake up! Wake up!
Yeah.
Wake up! And the guy's asleep in the middle of the day. So anyway, that's a little bit of my memory lane in New Jersey.
That is truly bizarre.
It is.
It feels like in New Jersey, you could open any given door and there's something going on like that.
Oh my God, that's very true. But it's interesting. So it'll bring you to the DEA days. DEA was an amazing opportunity for me. I spent 20 years with them, traveled all over the world, and chased people all over the world. We were in Florida constantly. We were in New Jersey. We were in New York. We were in Arizona. Wherever the drugs were. We were in Texas. We would go. Which is just so bizarre and so different than a local police officer that has jurisdiction that is clearly defined. We had no jurisdiction. If you know, we had jurisdiction. We had no border
sector. Yeah.
Yeah. There you go. And so it was kind of crazy. It really was. I'll never forget one of the cases when I first came in. Well, here's a story. You want a DEA story?
Of course.
So we moved down to New Jersey, where my wife does not want to be. Okay, we don't know anything about New Jersey. So we moved down on a Friday. On Sunday, I get a phone call, and it's supposedly my new partner. Hey, the boss has asked me to pick you up on Sunday. Later tonight. We're going to Atlantic City. So my wife is there with a 3-month-old baby in a town she doesn't know at all. And I'm now leaving, and I was away for 4 days doing surveillance, chasing drug guys.
Sounds like she may have achieved sainthood through your career.
Well, isn't that so? So within the next 2 months or so, I'm on a surveillance in Hudson County, and we're on a 4 to 12 shift or whatever. So I show up, I leave. I have friends coming. It's Memorial Day. I have friends and family coming to visit, to ease the pain for my wife. And I show up, and I'm on my way into New York, and at 4 o'clock, the boss calls, and he says, same boss, and says, Steve, I need you to go to JFK. Benjamin who we've been chasing, just left for Florida. Get on the next plane. That's it. What do I do with my car? Just leave it out front. Leave the key underneath. We'll deal with Port Authority. Don't worry about it. Just get on the next plane. So I jump on a plane, Air Florida, which is now defunct. And as we're on the plane, so you know that we can travel with our weapons. We just have to declare it. So we're on the plane. It's actually myself and a partner. We're on the plane, and the pilot comes on and says, ladies and gentlemen, this is the pilot. I'm sorry to report that we have just been notified that Air Florida is now declared bankruptcy, and this will be our last flight.
Oh, man.
How am I going to get home, right? Number one. So it's probably 8 o'clock in the evening now on Friday, and I have to call my wife when I finally get to the office. Means I didn't have my radio, and my radio wouldn't work down in Miami, so I have to show up at the office, sign out a radio, and we rent a car. And anyway, I have to call her and say, I'm in Miami. What do you mean you're in Miami? I'm in Miami. When are you coming home? I don't know. I chased that Benjamin, that son of a seahorse. We chased him for 10 days and finally found him in the Dominican Republic.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That is, see, that's so cool and crazy. And it just reminds me when I was younger in law enforcement and I had an opportunity. I kind of did a bit of a pre-interview with NCIS. At the time I graduated.
Great organization. Yeah.
I graduated with a degree in computers, believe it or not. And I also had a background in law enforcement. And I'd heard through the grapevine through somebody, you're just the guy they're looking for. They want somebody with those skills but who's a cop. So, I spoke with Special Agent Morrow out of the nuclear sub base in Newport, Rhode Island, I believe. And I thought the job, that was for me. Jet setting, chasing bad guys, all that stuff. And it's funny because when it came down to it, he said, I think you'd be a good applicant. You should apply. But I have to ask you, do you know what the life would be like? I said, I don't really. I said, can I work in Rhode Island? He's like, no. He goes, it took me 15 years to get here. Let me tell you that. And he kind of told me, listen, and this Steve Gould had just bought a house. I just got a puppy, dating a girl I liked. And he laid out what my life would be like. And that was a wake up call. And he also said, think about it real hard the next couple of days and call me back because the background is intensive. And we certainly don't want to do a 6-month background on someone who's going to bail. And I ended up bailing. I said, let me be real with myself. I like being near family. I like my house. I got a puppy I like, you know what I mean? I said, I'm going to have to dump all that. I don't know what I was thinking. I just wasn't thinking. And then later on in my police career, 10 years later, a friend of mine who was younger on the job, he went with the DEA and he got all the way through and he just bought a house and had a fiance. And I don't think she was picking up what he was putting down, if you know what I'm saying. And this guy would have been a great asset to you guys. I mean, smart, hard charger, 6'2", jacked. No, he just would have been a great agent. Didn't go. Because, the reality is you guys in that job, it's a huge sacrifice. It's huge. It looks so exciting and so awesome, and I'm sure it is most of the time. But the sacrifice you guys give to the job is absolutely huge. And I think just like being a police officer is a calling, I think being that kind of law enforcement agent is a calling. You have to have that in you to do that. Would you agree with that?
Oh, without question. It certainly, there's a lot of divorce because, wives, I mean, look at me. There's 2 or 3 times where I was away and for an indeterminate time. When I went to Florida, I had no clothes except what I was wearing. So I had to buy clothes. And guess what? DEA isn't going to pay for those clothes. That's not going to happen. You're on your own, buddy. And so, yes, I do think that it is. First of all, look, every job where you have the authority to take someone's life, the training, and to be called on to do some crazy things requires a great deal of commitment. There's no question, policing included. The difference between the police and DEA, the FBI, ATF, Customs, or ICE, is that you don't get paid overtime.
Oh, really?
They give you a stipend. Well, it could be a whole different thing. They give you a stipend. They give you 25% right off the bat. You get it in your check every time. But that 25%, they expect you to do 20 more hours a week. Very often you're doing 40 and 50 hours more a week. Sometimes they're 90-hour weeks. And so it really doesn't, it pays you because you get it regularly, but it's almost like, it's being on salary. I mean, the difference between people who, a lawyer who's on salary and I don't care, you're working Saturday and Sunday and I'm not because you're the junior person, and that's sort of the way it happens. So yes, it does take dedication, and you have to be, my goodness, I'm so proud of having served for that many years with DEA and to keep my family intact, which is not always easy. And yet it showed me the world.
It's so cool. It just sounds so awesome. And to contrast that, I have to say, I couldn't be happier doing, I am in an ultra small town now, and I never thought I would say it, but I'm like, I couldn't be happier. I love being a caretaker of a community. It has been so rewarding. I literally have known people from like the country store or wherever, and later down the road, help their family with serious critical issues going on. But I knew them, had that relationship already. And it's just been way more rewarding than I could have ever imagined. It's just a total contrast to that. But it's really rewarding getting to know a small community. And I think I don't want to deter people from that line of work. I think later in life, I'm in my 40s, that kind of stuff is way more appealing. I think naturally chasing the bad guys down is probably more appealing when you're a little bit younger. And it's still appealing to me. I think it's badass. It's really cool. And thank goodness there's people willing to do that job. But yeah, that's so cool. I really want to ask you, Steve, and I know people are interested in this question. You're a cop, a local cop, and you want to transition to federal. Is that how it worked? Did you go right from local to federal? There's nothing in between?
No, there really isn't.
For you, there was that you just took the test and went to Boston, took all that stuff.
There is no test. With DEA, and they're still hiring now. They're looking for people. So you, as you said at the beginning, I'm a professor, so I'm constantly talking to young people who are interested, and there are students who want to be police officers but never will be. Partly because they only want to be a police officer in their hometown. Well, you have limited yourself if that's all you want to do.
That's tough.
And much like your own experience of saying, we're going to go out to California and see what the hell happens, and right. You found yourself a job. I mean, that's a leap of faith to have done what you've done. And by the same token, I can tell you so many people, young people who want to be police officers or DEA agents, you're going to make your bones. And so I'll say, go to New Hampshire, go to Rhode Island, go to Vermont, go to Connecticut. Go to California.
I say that all the time. See, I go to who will take you. Get in.
That's right.
Start doing it.
And you find your way back later.
Yes.
And that's exactly like that guy from NCIS said, it took me 15 years to get home.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same thing with DEA. What ends up happening is, first of all, let me say this. Most people who get hired with DEA are not 21 years old or 23 years old. The expectation of a federal agent is that you are going to get whatever is out of your system before you ever set foot and raise your right hand to be a DEA agent. So the average age is between 27 and 29.
That just makes sense.
You have to become an agent before 37 because you can only remain an agent for 20 years and get out by 57.
Oh, really?
So yes.
Interesting.
Yes. And that's across the board with all federal agents. And so when I applied, I had to go down and be interviewed, and things have changed a little bit. But I had told you most of the people who went into my class had master's degrees, right? Most of them did. You have to have a minimum of a bachelor's degree, or they're not even going to look at you.
Right.
A lot of military end up at DEA, but I went into a class with 40 people. And when we were done, there were 25 left.
Holy, that's a huge attrition.
It is. And I'm told that there were 3,000 to 5,000 who applied for those 40 jobs.
Now, is this falling off mostly? Is it mostly academic or physical?
What do you mean?
Do people separate mostly because of
What
physical
was the
or
reason?
academic?
Oh, okay. Well, I will tell you that some of them were academic, some of them were behavioral, and some of them were physical to a degree. As I recall, I will tell you a few of the people. So out of the 40 people, remember, this is Vietnam era, right afterwards. Out of the 40 people, there were only 5 of us out of 40 that had any military experience. That's amazing to me.
Yeah.
So everybody else was civilian, but there's some were police officers, some weren't nothing. They just came out of the real world.
Yeah.
And someone was relieved for not being able to drive. Somebody was relieved for firearms issues. Somebody was relieved for fraternization. Somebody was relieved for
what is Steve?
cheating.
You gotta explain fraternization.
Screwing around with other people in the classroom when it was forbidden.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And then another one had lied about taking handcuffs, that I brought the handcuffs in, and they actually went in. It was not a search warrant, went into the room and they found that pair of handcuffs. It's $25. That agent to be was relieved of duty. And we were told the next day, Sally won't be in here anymore. She's gone home.
What a thing to lose your job over, your career.
Oh, silly stuff. So we're down there for 16 or 18 weeks. You have to live there. You do not get to come home for the most part. And I think what most people do not understand, they'll understand when I tell it, is that you have no idea where they're going to send you. None whatsoever. The only person who's going to go back to their home office is the number one student, period. Everybody else is not going home.
Really?
So you're going to go. Yeah, you're going to go to L.A., you're going to go to Chicago, you're going to go to Dallas, you're going to go to Miami, you're going to go to New York, exactly. You're going to go to the 5 majors, 6 majors. And for me, I ended up in Newark, New Jersey, and ended up doing all kinds of work in New York City. And, of course, constantly in Florida, Colombia. They sent me to Russia. Just crazy stuff.
My buddy, that was part of my buddy's deterrent. Was he had a buddy in the agency, and he told him, whether this is good or not, he said, you're going to go to New York City, and you're going to spend the whole time trying to get out of there.
Yes.
That's what he told me. He goes, New York City just needs so much manpower, and just be prepared, because you're going to be there for years, and you'll get other assignments, but it won't be for a while. Because it's such a beast.
It's nothing like New York City. Those major offices, you learn. You get big cases, big problems, big cases, traffic, doing all of that kind of stuff. It's a hassle, but I'll tell you what, you make your bones, and it's easy to talk about now. Many years later, in the middle of it, it wasn't always fun. Except when you went out on raids and you did what you had to do, exactly what you get paid to do. Yeah.
There's really interesting. I met an FBI agent at a Christmas party, and a U.S. Air Marshal was there. It was quite the law enforcement party, And Marshal hated his job. It was the worst job he ever took. He's an ex-military guy. U.S. Air Marshal is very boring. But the FBI agent he had managed a Best Buy for years, and he had applied to the FBI a few times, and he got in. Smart guy, good head on his shoulders. I can see why they chose him, and it was really interesting. He was saying that every state regulates what federal agents can do differently, and I've mentioned this before in the podcast because it blew my mind. His lead agent in Boston said that his powers were limited off duty. If he was on duty, surveilling or doing stuff, he had full peace officer powers. But in Massachusetts, off duty, no clearance to do anything. The guy basically told him, don't do any law enforcement action unless you're working. And then he said Virginia gives federal agents full peace officer.
Right.
And I said, well,
oh, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I just that to me was.
You still so what? I'll tell you how I'd explain that. So what that means is you're still a federal agent. You can enforce federal laws.
Right.
Right. But when you intercede in something that is state related, you have to be very, very careful whether or not the state will treat you as an acting agent, but you're not sworn as an officer in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And so it can cause you some problems because they don't want you to, they would like you to intervene in another felony. So if I'm at a bank, even as a DEA agent, if I'm at a bank and somebody's robbing the bank, it's a federal offense. I can intercede.
Right.
But if it is a theft in a store, and I intercede, my authority isn't handed to me, right? Because it's a misdemeanor in many cases. And even if it's a felony, it's not a felony within my jurisdiction, right? And so they are right. The state can dictate how federal agents are treated when it comes to state violations in their, what's the word I'm trying to say, in their presence.
It's very interesting. I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with it. I think states should have governing authority of what they want to do. It makes things unneededly complicated to me, but I understand. I mean, we used to have federal park rangers where I used to work because of National Seashore, and we would just swear them as police because it's like they would deal with this thing where when they came off parkland, they were good for like major emergencies, public safety issues, like anything that was a harm to the public, whatever. But other stuff, like if a traffic stop took them onto our roads, now they needed to call us, and so we're just let's just swear them in because this is stupid. These guys are FLETC trained peace officers. But it was funny because but then the rules change, so they would come onto our highway, and they would just order everybody out of the car because that's what they would do in Parkland. And then I remember showing up to one and going, what's going on? He goes, well, I always get everybody out of the car and look in the car. And I'm like, not in the state of Massachusetts. You can't do that. And he's like, well, that's how we operate on that. We have federal land. We have federal land. We have that jurisdiction. And I was like, I get it. And they got, believe it or not, they used to get good drugs on the parkland, but I kind of I pulled them aside and was like, I'd be careful because, you're operating as a Massachusetts police officer right now. We don't have that kind of authority, Right. So that stuff is always fascinating to me. I think it's so fascinating with the different jurisdictional stuff, and how in Massachusetts is just terrible with that kind of stuff. They just are. They make it needlessly complicated. It's like the state is ruled by case law, basically, even with police training. That's why we're trying to get posts now, because it's like we have no standards. They're just kind of like, it's ruled by case law, like I'm a firearms instructor, and they our firearm standards are all over the board. We get recommendations from the MPTC, but they're not gospel, So I remember there's a Brockton case because they teach us this stuff, and there was they shot a guy at nighttime, and then a stray bullet hit a lady, and because Brocktons are shooting all the time, and then it was like, well, do you guys shoot at nighttime? They're like, no, we don't have the money to do that. And they were like, well, that doesn't matter. 2/3 of your shift works at nighttime, so you should be shooting at nighttime. And
that's a liability issue.
Yeah, and then the city lost millions of dollars, and I think. I mean, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole because I'm sure you have so much more knowledge on it than I do. But I would love to talk to you at some point about police reform and the forming of Massachusetts coming to some standards. Because it's bizarre. We're one of the last states that just kind of doesn't have any kind of concrete standards. As of July 1st, we have post, so that's all changing now. But to me, maybe I'm nerding out on it. It kind of fascinates me, and maybe the listeners think it's boring. But to me, that stuff is just fascinating.
Well, I think what gets us in trouble in law enforcement across the country is the lack of standards nationwide. And, part of what I know that I and many of my colleagues and some of the scholars have been calling for a national police college. And that doesn't mean that everybody goes to national police college, but there's this virtually every country in Europe has a national police college.
Oh, they go to school forever.
Yeah, it's 3 years sometimes. So I spent a lot of time in Ireland. I was on a Fulbright scholarship, and I was working with the Garda and University of Limerick, and I'm very impressed with the way they are trained. But the point I was trying to make was this, that in Mississippi versus California, or Seattle versus South Dakota, Florida versus Texas, there is no consistent period of time that somebody has to go to a police academy. Incredible. And that, in my mind, is ludicrous. So you've got somebody who goes to school for 12 weeks in a state down south, and they are sworn in, they carry a weapon, they have full authority. You come up here, it's 25 to 30 weeks. Right. And you have to scratch your head to say, well, what the hell is missing from the 14 or 12 weeks that they did not go to class, right. And yet they're bona fide police officers. Yeah. and Steve, what I say too is this: at some point in time with college, somebody in this country said, in order to get an associate's degree, you have to have 60 credits. It's not 35 in one state and 25 in another and 42 in another. It's 60, and it's 120 for another for a bachelor's degree. I don't like federal interference, even though I was a federal agent, but I think that's one way that we can kind of tamp down some of the problems and the behavior issues of a police department from one state to another.
Yeah. I agree. It would be nice to have some kind of standard. It's about integrity. It's like on a micro scale, I do the firearms thing, and I like us to shoot twice a year. I like to train a couple times a year. I like to do low light shooting, moving targets. The whole thing they suggest. I want to do it, but I might be next to a neighboring community that does once a year. They stand static at the line and they shoot.
Right. Well, so I've been through all of that kind of stuff. So if you think about, I've been a police officer at the military, at the municipal, and at the federal level. And so in the military, I probably shot 4 times a year. When I went to Dover, I probably maybe 3 times a year. So it was twice a year and low light.
That's pretty good.
Right. You go to DEA and it was every 2 months.
Really?
And
wow.
all the bullets. Oh my goodness. All the bullets you can take home. Is the way it used to be, because we needed to become quite familiar with every weapon that we carried. We were also issued the equivalent of a submachine gun, and we had to be qualified with that submachine gun. And so it took an awful lot of training. But even in some of the towns that I have been with, Steve, it troubles me that they're, like you said, once a year, and we're supposed to know how to handle that weapon.
I know, and it's not. Shooting is a perishable skill. It's not like riding a bike. It's every time I used to shoot a lot and go to competitions because I got into reloading, and I could shoot at like 25 yards. I could shoot a pie plate, a group, like an apple. Even out to 50, I was pretty damn good. Stopped doing that for about 3-4 years. Yeah. I'm half that good now. Right. It just doesn't, right. It just does. I'm still a good shot, but it's perishable. You lose it. And, I got to tell you, Steve, I'm glad to hear the DEA shoots that much, because I used to get a national magazine where I used to work, and they always had fallen for every year. They'd have like the fallen officers, and DEA always led the pack. It seemed like for getting shot. There was a lot of DEA agents that got shot. Like every year, it seemed like they were out of the federal agents. They were the ones that were shooting it up.
Well, and I think, that's the crazy part. And that's the difference between my time as a local and my time as a federal agent. Anytime I walked out in an official capacity, my gun was out because we were walking in on a felony. That could never happen as a police officer. You had to be judicious in when you were able to unholster your weapon. Right. But the DEA, drugs and guns went together. They still go together. And there were shootings for sure. And as many times as there may have been agents who have been shot, they were involved in a lot of shootings, an awful lot of shootings. Oh, yeah. And usually they were pretty, sometimes people would get hurt or killed. And I don't mean to be cavalier about it. I've gone to too many police funerals in my day. But I would say I was very, very happy to be next to an extremely well-trained DEA agent who was able and capable with the weapons we were issued.
Absolutely. I mean, it seems like the few times I've worked with you guys as a police officer, one that came to mind that was kind of funny, like the few agents there are on Cape Cod, or they seem to be like very good guys and like in good spirits and very likable.
Well, who wouldn't be? That's a great posting.
Right. Well, we had a warrant for a kid that sold some bad heroin, killed somebody in Boston, and they came down and they were in their unmarked Explorers, and I'll never forget, we were kind of staging, and one of them was like, "Did you bring your vest?" And he's like, "Damn it. I left it at the office." And he's like, screw it. So they didn't even have their vests. But I remember thinking, like, this probably to these guys is like, whatever, some kid on Cape Cod selling dope.
Well,
you shouldn't treat.
As a manager, I have to tell you, I would have said, I've done that before as a manager with DEA. I would say, "Where's your vest?" I'll never forget something. We were in Lowell one day. And
Lowell, I would wear my vest walking my dog.
No, it's not that bad. But so we're in Lowell, we're out to eat. And virtually, you couldn't leave the office without seeing a drug deal. You just couldn't. And the office that it was responsible for was a task force. So there were police officers from, as I recall, New Hampshire, National Police, New Hampshire State Police, Mass State Police, ATF, Customs, the old Customs, but it would be ICE, the Marshal Service, Haverhill Police, Lowell Police, Lawrence Police. So we're just an amalgamation of different badges, and we're out there. And I was leaving. We had gone to a pizza joint, and now the radio chatter starting at 27 37. We got a guy on the bike. Looks like it just made a pass. It was over the phone. So I'm listening to this, and so I'm the boss. So I say 6101 to all units. I'm sorry, I'm going back in time.
I like it.
Does anybody have a blue light? No answer. Does anybody have handcuffs? No answer. I ask again, is there a blue light or handcuffs? And nobody answered. I said, peel off, meet me back at the office. And I chewed their asses out to say, I don't care if you're going to play this game, right, where you're going to see something, you want to do something, I will not interfere, but you better have the damn tools. Yeah. And if you don't, you're not doing it. I don't want to see somebody sitting on somebody, calling for somebody, can you bring me some handcuffs? And I've seen that before. So it's silly. We become, like you said, lackadaisical maybe. I'm not saying that they're bad. It's not it, but they weren't going out on an arrest. So they had their gun, but they didn't have some of the other tools. Right.
It's like the guys that always end up shooting themselves at the range are the firearms instructors because they get complacent. They're like, hey, I deal with guns all the time. That can. It sounds like you're a good manager. You were pulling them in, and hey, you got to have this stuff. So
and then what a jackass! Hey guys, there'll be another deal tomorrow. Don't worry about that. Little shit will be around tomorrow. It's not a big deal. Just bring your handcuffs if you're going to take action. That's all I'm asking.
Absolutely. So Steve, can you tell us about one of your more intense or terrifying calls that you responded to as a law enforcement officer?
Well, I think most of the drug raids were that way, and I thought about that. And there's plenty of times when there have been shootings and there have been threats, and in many cases, actually, I was in DEA. I was a DEA in Boston, and I happened to be in the communications center and talking to the communications officer who later became an agent, and I heard a unit call in. Whatever it might have been, 2713 head communications, shots fired. And he didn't hear it. I heard it, but he didn't hear it. So I said, what did they just say? And he goes, I don't know, because he was too busy talking to me. And I jumped on the radio. I pushed him out of the way and I jumped on the radio. Last unit reporting, did you say shots fired? Yes. What's your location? Bang, East Boston, and no problem. So we start, whoever I was, communications, all units in the vicinity, head over there. Well, what had happened, I'm very happy this happened. What had happened was there were shots fired, and the shots were fired towards them. But these little shits over there in East Boston had cheap guns, and they were really belly guns. And what happens is very often on those cheap guns, if you wrap your hand around the stock, where the magazine chamber is, very often you'll hit the button and eject it. So what had happened was this guy had turned to the agent who was getting ready to question him and pointed the gun at them. One in the chamber went off, and then he basically ejected the magazine. So it rendered that. I know, trust me, I know. But it rendered it useless, and they were able to chase him down and tackle him. But those are the kinds of things that we had run into. But I will also say the other thing, which is I won't say it would be terrifying, but I had the distinct pleasure and honor and pain of bringing a team down to Ground Zero on 9/11. We arrived there about 6:00, and I will tell you that it is the most difficult thing. If you ask me what do I want to say? What opens up on me the most? It's my time at 9/11, because there's so much video on it, and it's just so hard to recall. Actually, I was thinking about it with what happened in Florida with the building that fell.
Yeah.
Right. In Surfside, it looked quite similar to the way it compacted and such. But to watch the pain that the police went through, that the fire people went through, all the people looking for their loved ones, the body parts, the smell, it was fruitless. And I had been in that building. There was another building that had fallen, and I stood there numb when I first got there and thought, where are the desks? Where are the phones? Where are the? You couldn't see it. It's all pulverized. Whatever was in that, I don't know how, got compacted and pulverized. So that still sticks with me. But again, I'm so, any police officer in America wanted to heed the call to come. I was lucky to say I got a call from a colleague down there who said, send help. And we put together a team and went down there.
How soon after it collapsed were you there? You said 6 p.m. that day?
Yeah. Yeah, it was just turning. I would say it was just turning. It was just starting to get dusk.
Wow.
Right. Yeah.
And what was your main? What did they put you on for a task?
Well, it was a strange thing because one of the things that one of the things we were responsible for was to help the disaster mortuary personnel get around, because if you weren't badge carrying guy. You weren't, by midnight, that place was completely cordoned off, that no one could get in unless they had an identification. In fact, between 12 o'clock between 6 and 12 o'clock, we were allowed to come in. After that, they said, go to the FBI, and the FBI credentialed us, and then we moved around.
Steve, what did it look like? Was it, I'm picturing not knowing, was it just the whole area covered in gray dust? Was it just completely?
It wasn't just covered in gray dust. It was still dust. It was in some places. It was inches thick.
Wow.
And the smell of, I don't mean to go down that road, but the smell of jet fuel was there. I remember walking. See, now I'm going to go down memory lane. It hurts a little bit, but it is nothing I could do. I mean, that's not. It was just that experience was mind numbing. And what ended up. So one of the landing gear was just smack in the middle of an open space, just absolutely crazy. But I will tell you that the city pulled together pretty quickly. And I remember going to one of the piers, which with the OEM, the Office of Emergency Management, set up basically an office, and we were able to go in there. Well, so let me explain. So we drive in, and the National Guard had just been called out. So if you have your badge and your gun at first, and a blue light, red lights are in New York, you were able to go in. So we went in, and immediately the Red Cross is there, and they're handing you a helmet. They're handing you a mask. They're asking you if you need gloves, if you need anything you needed, you could have there. And by 9 o'clock, in fact, people would walk up to you and say, "Where's your mask?"
Like are these like
yes,
N95 construction masks, or are they like
no they had two filters on them.
Oh, like the real deal.
They were the real deal. And so anyway, our phones weren't working because when the tower fell, at the top of the tower were all kinds of radio. But this is running longer than you wanted to, I'm sure, but
not at all.
Our radio system was on the top of the World Trade Center. So when that went down, most of New York's radio systems and cell towers went out. So we end up going down to Office of Emergency Management. Verizon set up and said, once we got our credentials at the FBI, they set up and said, okay, here, take this, and here's a cell phone. Okay, great. What do I do with this cell phone? Cell phone's going to work. We set up a whole new system. How long will it work? It will work for as long as you want it. So they were just handing them out to responders. It was just absolutely amazing what ended up happening. But I want to tell you a silly story, and it's sad, but it's silly. It's silly. So we're in line, I've got my raid jacket on. I've got my badge on. I've got a hat on. I'm not with DEA, by the way, at this time. I'm with the HHS, the Inspector General's office.
Okay.
Right? And so I brought a team from Boston, and we arranged to bring a team from Philadelphia. So we have to walk into this building that's been converted. It's a converted garage, and it's basically the FBI's credentialing center. And it turned out to be also their intelligence center. And I get out of the car, and when we walked in, there was machine gun nests on top of it with FBI HRT teams. So wow. If you weren't supposed to be there, you were going to get whacked. So as you walk in, there's 2 black SUVs and a couple of HRT guys with AR-15s. Maybe they were M16s. I'm not sure. And the window rolls down. And I'm walking towards there to go get my credentials, right? Get my picture taken and all that stuff. And somebody rolls the window down and says, "Stop that man." Now I'm thinking, I'm a federal agent. What do you mean, stop that man? And so these 2 sentries jump in front of me and they block me with their guns at port, right? And the door opens and I look up. This is a guy who is an FBI agent who I had helped to get the job as an FBI agent, who used to be an officer in my hometown.
You're kidding.
Here we are that's my point. Here we are on 9/11. I hadn't seen him in 5 years. And here we are meeting, right? It's just one of those strange occurrences, if you can imagine.
Yeah.
Right? Silly stuff.
But oddly comforting, probably, Yeah,
it was, with big hugs. And anyway, I digress.
Man, that's incredible. I remember not having any real understanding, but being in college and watching that happen and just being, I didn't know they started talking about Osama bin Laden, all this other stuff. Who's that guy? Why would someone do that? But it's incredible to think so many agencies were drawn in, and it sounds like New York City should have a big pat on the back and I think they did get that for organizing in such short time, that to have things like cell phones and masks and that's incredible. Wow. That's definitely you'd have there was water and food and where the officers, they had turned the church into sort of a flop area for people just to sleep on the pews, but outside were socks and changes of underwear and whatever you needed, new pair of pants. They were giving shoes out, and I'm talking about work boots. Yeah,
right? Because that place was so hot at some point, in many places it was still warm. When we got there were still fires and embers burning. So anyway, let's move on to something else.
Yeah, it's
more pleasant.
It's so, such an incredible event, and I don't want to bring us down a rabbit hole, but it did draw this country together, and we're on the opposite of that spectrum right now, but it really did. It really did bring national pride and togetherness and brotherly love to the forefront. As terrible as it was. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing this, Steve. I can tell it's painful.
But I also think this. So when 9/11 happened and terrorism became, the talk of the town, and we had to worry about that, and Homeland Security came to the fore. I'm still, as a scholar and as a practitioner, somebody who's been in the business for an awful long time and now still teaching it. I think that we lost our way a little bit in policing after that, because we were going down towards community policing, and all of the money and the funding and the focus shrunk. It just evaporated. And so we basically put the entire 800,000 officers on notice to keep an eye out for terrorists. Now, I will tell you that most of the officers you would talk to say, "Well, what are you looking for?" "I don't know. I just was told to look for terrorists."
Right.
What the hell does that mean? And so as a result, we got distracted. And I dare say that that's one of the reasons that we in policing took our eye off of the ball of community policing. And I truly believe that had we continued focusing on community policing, those in the community could tell us who was showing up to do something a little bit unusual, who was showing up that was not necessarily normally in the neighborhood or the community. And now we're scrambling to get back to it because I think this country needs more community mindedness.
Absolutely. I just saw, I just had an article forwarded to me from a chief of police, and it was about shootings nationally, and Massachusetts fared very well. There were very few shootings, and when they looked at it, and I'm sure you saw the same thing, Massachusetts is a very strange place to be a police officer because, like we talked about before, there's 10,000 little fiefdoms. There's a chief in every community. We're not into regional policing that much. We're not into the sheriff's policing. We have the state police. We have local police, period. The sheriffs do the jails. So we get kind of ragged on for having all these little tiny jurisdictional issues because every town and city has their own thing. But it seems like one of the offshoots of that is the local police really get to know their community.
Yes.
And it turns out relationally, that's not a word, relationships. Yeah, relationship-wise, it's a positive. It's a good thing. And I was kind of proud when I read that article. I said, well, it's, we kind of get bagged on for having all these, there's a chief in the town of 500 people, and he has reserve guys that come in and whatever. But these guys know that community, and we work with the state, and it turns out might not be a bad way. It's kind of a throwback. Might not be a bad way to know your community, and it's community policing at its rawest. It truly is, and I see it all the time where I work, where we have a county dispatch board where there could be 20 towns on the board and 17. Or maybe 17 different cops and 15 towns. It's just it's all that local knowledge and all that know-how and things we learned about the community is all applied by necessity. Like we have to know all these people and all their relationships with each other and with us, and it's kind of cool,
Hey, you just got the call interfered.
Do you have to go?
My wife, no.
Oh,
my wife just said, hello? I'm sorry. I thought I dismissed the call, so I'm going to
if it's your wife, you got to take it.
I understand. No, I think you're right. I think in New England especially, there's local control, and that's what we expect and we demand. And so I do think that in many cases, first of all, I think there's a little bit more restraint in policing here. I think it's also a byproduct of our fear as police officers to take action unless it's absolutely necessary, given sort of the way policing is bending. But I'm hopeful that we're going to figure out a way to get out of it. I do a lot of training at sergeants levels here in New England and at chiefs and development, executive development, and we've got to stay the course. I mean, that's the really important thing, that there's plenty of people who are taking shots at police, but I'm not sure what our country, what our communities would be without police. Absolutely. Who else would you call?
Hey, Steve, I'm hoping in the future at some point, maybe seeing you at sergeant school at Roger Williams College. I don't know if you're involved in that at all.
That's what I do all of the time.
Wouldn't that be funny if I'm in your class?
Yeah, no. Yeah, that happens all of the time. Yes, no, I do the leadership training at Justice System Training and Research Institute, which is Roger Williams, and so I was just there a couple of weeks ago, and I hope to see you. It's a great program, and I'll tell you what I think is important for listeners to do as we do development. I don't think we do a real good job of developing people until after they get promoted. But what happens when you're in a classroom, and especially a classroom where it's not lecture driven and it's not PowerPoint driven, but it's facilitator driven, you learn so much from other sergeants or sergeants to be. And what you begin to realize, and you've been around long enough to know, and the conversations you had on this podcast, is that we're all kind of the same. Right? We've all been exposed to the same jackass manager. We've all dealt with the same jackass on the street, sure. And we're all aiming for the same thing, and it's to help people and to kind of stay out of trouble, but to do the right thing.
Absolutely. It's funny. I went to I have to give accolades to the chief that I had on Cape Cod. He sent me to polish the badge, which is a class you send guys to that have been on for 5 years or longer. They're not sergeants, but you kind of want to keep them motivated and, whatever. And I think it was the chief or deputy chief of Hartford taught the class. And I thought it was so great. I thought it was so fun to go there and go with other patrolmen who had years in the job, and some sergeants, and just have a day and talk stuff out. And he talked about being OIC, which I'd done a bunch, which is you're officer in charge, but you have no rank. So in a small department, you might be in charge of a couple, 3 guys because the sergeant's not there. And I made this analogy to him. I said, it's kind of like, you're like the substitute teacher. It's like,
that's exactly what it's like.
I said, they know you have no real authority except that you're senior and you've been given OIC. So you kind of have to handle it. You have to handle every officer with kid gloves because it's like unless they have your respect, they're not going to be doing, they're not going to be listening to you, any kind of advice that you have, and it was cool too. Cause he said, he goes, I really like that analogy. I'm going to use that in the future. I said, oh, please do,
Good for you. You're a superstar now.
That's right. So, my hat's off to chiefs that, send people to training and build up their patrol staff, and don't forget about them. And cause they're out there doing their thing. Steve, I got 2 more questions. We can make it quick. I know I've had you on here for a long time. Do you have a positive situation that you want to share?
Well, I think there's a lot of positive situations, and there are mistakes that I've made when I was a police officer or an agent. But I think, the positive side that I remember vividly is being able to help people. I will never forget, again, some of the stories that I talk about is repeatedly about death. And yet when you get a call to somebody who's failing, sometimes you can save them and sometimes that you can't. But in terms of, and I think this is the important part, in terms of what we are and what we bring to the table, it's about being human. Right? It really is. It's about being human. It's about caring for other people. The strange thing about policing, in my view, is that you get called on to help people you don't know, to do things that you never expected you'd be asked to do. And sometimes, and many times, you're helping people without even knowing it. I'll never forget going to an elder. When I say elderly, he was probably my age. He was in his 60s, maybe 70. Yeah. And he had fallen down the stairs and he had been failing because of cancer. And I walked in and it took several minutes for the ambulance to come. But in the meantime, he was alert. He was awake. He was conversational. So I sat there, I held his hand. He didn't need oxygen or any of those things. And we just talked. And that's really all we did. Well, you never know. When you go to a call like that, you never know how it ends up. You know that, Steve.
Sure.
You go somewhere, somebody goes to the hospital and you don't have to follow up. You don't get the follow up. And with HIPAA, nobody will tell you anyway. Right?
Absolutely.
But I remember getting a letter or being called into the office of the chief, and he sat me down and he said, I want you to read this letter. He had made a copy, and what it basically was, it was, again, I know the name quite well. It was Mr. Peters, and it was his wife who said that I showed up, your officer showed up, and he didn't know the history, but he was so compassionate. I think that's important, right? He was so compassionate. He was so caring, and he was so calming. I didn't think it was calming, but that's what the letter said. Sure. And unfortunately, he passed. But your officer, thank him, because he made the last few hours reasonable, and I don't know what the other word was, but in other words, the pass in a positive way. And so thank him. I didn't know he had died. So I think those are the positive things. When you walk in, you have to remember you're walking into someone that is like your parent. or like your child, or like your aunt, or your uncle, or your grandfather. And so it becomes important that you carry yourself well. You do not tarnish the badge, like you just said, rather than polish the badge. And I think that's a very important message to get out there, that you can make a difference. You may never know who you helped, but it's all in your attitude. You want to be brusque, and you want to be nasty, and you want to be condescending. Okay, you really haven't helped the situation.
Hell yeah. Yeah. Steve, that's so true. I've received a few letters over the years that, and those letters, I'm walking on the clouds for a couple of weeks. Like you know what? It just completely reinvigorates me for the job. Yeah. When you hear someone, I mean, I've not written a letter to someone for years. You know what I mean? When someone takes the time, you affected their life that much to write a letter to your boss about you specifically. I mean, damn, it just means so much to police officers. That's wonderful.
Well, it usually I just want to finish with that. It usually comes from courtesy and compassion.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
And that's not, it's not illegal for police to act that way.
Right. One last question, Steve. And this one is a big one. We have a good size of our listenership are young people. And I know you're already teaching them in class, but they really want to know some advice, some sage advice that you might have for the young officer, the young agent, someone getting into the job. Is there anything you can break off for them?
Well, let's talk about whether recruiting and retention is a real problem. So if you're interested, now's the time. Now's the time to go in there and to make a difference. Right? I think that's really important. The other thing we said very early on, and that is don't hitch your wagon in one place. Right? You have to apply. If that's the case, go to where people are moving. If you're interested in doing that, think about that, Steve. Where are people moving? The Carolinas, Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Alabama.
Places they can be free.
That's exactly. And I think that's important. But first of all, you're going to get rejected if you apply. Don't let that stop you. Once you're on the job, there's going to be some people who are going to tell you, hey, kid, that's not the way we do it here. That's fine. But you be the judge of who is giving you that advice. We hope that FTOs are the best that we can provide, so that we're creating, the future for policing. But what I would say is that you have to protect yourself. Keep your guard up, but not everybody's bad. I think that's important. And focus on the good people of the community. And 90% of the people, if not more, are good people. So if you come off as brusque, if you come off as condescending, if you come off as arrogant, guess what you're doing? You're hurting yourself and you're hurting the badge. And at this moment in time, that's not what we need. Absolutely.
Good words of wisdom right there. Steve, before we go, tell us a little bit about the Cop Doc Podcast and what people can expect to hear if they tune in.
So we started about 6 or 8 months ago, and the focus is, when I say, so somebody says, well, what the hell is a cop doc? Well, I have a doctorate, and I'm a police officer with 35 years. I'm no longer 35 years experience. And so we focus on the organization and its people. And so we bring in people from all over the country, all over the world. I've talked to people from Garda. I'm talking to somebody from Police Scotland. I'm talking to somebody from Police Service of New York, of Northern Ireland. I've talked to people in Australia. And so we talk an awful lot about leadership, about the future, about fixing things, about learning from the mistakes of others. We talk about wellness, and we talk about the future of policing. And it's very, very exciting. I get to hear from people all over the world saying, boy, I wish my boss was listening to this stuff. And so it's very exciting. It's a leap of faith, as you did when you started. Yep. And so you can find, simple, if you have anything to say to me or any ideas, you can reach me at copdoc.podcast@gmail.com. And I'd be happy to hear from your listeners. And I'll be doing the same thing. I'll be sharing your link on my podcast site.
That's great. And the podcast is really fun. And like I said before, it's I love to hear from police leaders because, there's this weird thing, this weird pushback now amongst the troops where this police reform thing is kind of being fueled by the wrong ideas. And police should be reformed. Any business you're in should always be reforming. You should always be evolving. You know what I mean? Like, don't throw away the idea of making yourself better and making policing better because there's ideas coming from a bad place. And that's what I like about your podcast, where that's not part of it. That whole thing. This is like a podcast where they're talking about the real world, real life, how to actually improve policing, not from a place of your feelings or something you saw in the news or some propaganda. Forget about that. This is the real deal. This is real policing, cutting edge stuff. I heard an episode from a guy local to me in Pittsfield, Chief
Mike Wynn.
I loved it. I mean, I want to go work for that guy. He sounds like a great chief. And then a woman from Australia. Was she?
Oh yeah, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
If it was England, I was going to feel.
She's the director of knowledge for the Australian Institute of Police Management. Amazing. I said, wow, you must be smart to be the director of knowledge. You know everything. Oh, Steve, I don't know everything.
That's funny.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to do is to find thought leaders,
yes, and
innovators and people who are proactive. They're doing things to improve, and let's share it. That's what I'm trying to accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really fun listen, and I enjoy it when I'm cruising around in my cruiser. So, guys, go check that out. Steve, thank you so much. This was a really, really fun interview. I had a blast. You had some crazy stories. I know you have more stories. I'm sure you have so many. I mean, you're one of those guests where you're like, hey, you got a story about this? And you're like, well, let me start with this one and I'll go through 4 more. So people are going to love this. I really appreciate you coming on. What I'm going to do is I'll do the outro. We just hang on the line and I'll chat with you afterwards.
Yes.
All right. Sounds good. Hey guys, that was episode number 78. Steve Morreale. Wow. That was a fun one. That was really great. I really look forward to going on to his podcast and chatting with him further. Guys, thank you so much for the support. You are always writing me messages. You're rating and reviewing. I appreciate it. Like I said before, I'm getting so many reviews. I mean, I have over 500 now, which is incredible. But I have attracted trolls as well. So there's people throwing out kind of veiled threats almost in the reviews, like, 1 star, good information for the people who are anti-police, things like that, where they're saying like, I don't know if they're trying to use my podcast as ways to learn about the police to come at us. I don't know what that means, but I know that what you can do is you can go and rate and review 5 stars on iTunes. It really helps the podcast out. And the more you guys rate it and review it, the more I get guys like Steve who want to come on, and they just create really good content, and I'll keep getting it out to you. So if you want to be a guest, thingspolicey.com, scroll down, click be a guest. You can submit the form. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. I'm not looking for a huge biography. You don't have to write a lot. You can just put I worked here. One of the things I really want is I want you to have separated from your agency in good standing. Once in a while, I get someone who wants to come on and air the dirty laundry of their agency. Not interested, really. I'm just not. What I want is cops that left their agency in good standing and have really great stories they want to tell, or are still active and have really good stories they want to tell. It depends on your agency. We can use a fake name, a fake agency, check with your management, or if they're cool with it, by all means, come on. And I'm talking, people love to hear stories from a cop from small towns to big cities. It doesn't really matter. People love to hear a cop talk about their job, and I always enjoy it. So thingspolicey.com is where you can do all that stuff. And also you can support the show there. You can be a donor. You can do a one-off donation, or you can sign up for monthly stuff. There's also merch you can get. You can get a mug, a t-shirt. I have all those things. It actually comes out really good. I have to warn you about the merch. It's like a third party I use. they send it to you. I don't have the stuff. So if there's a problem, if something breaks, you're going to have to write an email to them, then get a hold of me. It's very much a donation is what I'm saying, because I don't know how good their customer service is. It seems like it's not great. So I just want to warn you of that. If you own a mug or a t-shirt and you don't like it, want to return it, there's been 2 or 3 issues out of a lot. Like, there's been a lot of great transactions. People love the merch. But there's been a few problems, and Printful is the company I use. They're not real approachable. So if there's a problem, I'll do my best to make it right, and I will make it right. It will take time. Just so you know, I want to be completely transparent with you. They're kind of a pain in the ass. So I appreciate if you want to do that. Most of the t-shirts come out awesome. There's just been a few that there was a problem, and I really had to work to make it right. So I'm thinking specifically of Jason. If you're listening, Jason, I'm still working on that issue. He got a broken mug, and it pissed me off. And I think I'm just going to send you one myself. I'm just going to buy it myself and send it to you. So just so you know, that's what's up with Printful. Usually good. This is like the worst ad for merch, but it's usually pretty great. But if there's a problem, it's kind of hard to resolve. Just so you know, I don't make really any money on it. It's just, if you want to have the podcast on something, you can do it through them, and they're usually pretty good. All right. Well, that's all I got to say. Thank you for listening, and I'm going to do my best to be back at you guys shortly.